everyone, and welcome to the September edition of Radio Unplugged. I'm Sakshi Shrivastava, the Marketing Manager at WRTH. And of course, as always, it's so great to have you all here today. Radio Unplugged is our monthly live series where we bring together some of the most inspiring voices in the radio industry and talk about the past, present, and future of this medium. Today's session is especially exciting because we're joined by Thomas Witherspoon, a lifelong shortwave listener, licensed ham radio operator, curator of Shortwave Radio Audio Archive, and the voice behind two influential blogs, the SWLing Post and QRPR.com. Before we get started, a quick but important and exciting note. Pre-orders for the WRTH 2026 80th edition, which is we're lovingly calling it the edition of a lifetime, and all other 2026 digital products have officially opened. This is our landmark 80th edition, and we believe it's a true collector's item, and the printed book will be available exclusively by pre-order. You can also pre-order the updated web app and ebook. Please visit wrth.info to reserve your copy. And as always, our CEO and Chief Editor Gunter Lorenz will lead today's conversation. We'll be speaking with Thomas about the past, present, and future of Shortwave, his work at his blogs, and all the other endeavors he's been doing, SDRs and field ops, and tips for newcomers. We'll then open the floor to your questions in the chat. So, Gunter, I'll hand over the discussion to you.
Thank you, Sakshi. Good morning, good day, good afternoon to everyone from wherever you are joining us around the globe, and special good morning to Thomas. Happy to see you finally in person and to meet you. I've been, I think everyone should have known about SWLing Post, at least as a shortwave listener. And if you're a ham radio operator like I am also, I'm Delta Lima 3 Golf Lima Foxtrot. And Thomas has a very nice call sign. It's K4SWL, so everybody knows what his real passion is. So we should all know about QRP, and QRP is nice because it's about low power. So getting right into the first question, Thomas, what inspired you to start these two blogs, the SWLing and the QRP?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on here. It's a real honor to hang with you guys today. And so I have been a lifelong shortwave radio listener, and I started probably around 8 years old or something. And back in the day, I didn't have access to, I didn't know about a lot of the communities that were out there in the world, like shortwave radio clubs and things like that. And it really wasn't until I graduated did my undergraduate degree and was doing shortwave radio listening, and the internet came around, that I realized just how much there was out there, how much community there was. And it was around 2008. My daughters had just been born. Actually, they were twins, and I had some time at home. And I thought, I want to, because I really love doing shortwave radio listening, but I couldn't find a website where people were sharing current news about shortwave radio stuff. But I was finding articles, and I thought, well, I'll just create a blog, because this was before social media had really become, really popular and developed. And I thought, I just want a site where people can go and I can just share some of these things. I looked at it almost as like my live bookmarks site, so people could see things I was interested in, and I'd maybe write reviews and things like that. But it turned out to be a fairly, I think what a marketing person would call a niche website. There was a need for it. There wasn't really anything else like it at the time. Passport to World Band Radio, another great book from the past. They had just shut down, and they used to have a blog that was also had some news items on it and things. And so I think people started finding a home at the SWLing Post. And I also, at the very same time, I started my QRP blog, QRPer.com, because I've always been, I've loved being an amateur radio operator, and I've almost always, operated low power. And especially, I like to do things in the field, both shortwave radio listening and ham radio. I like to do them in the field instead of the shack when I can. And so I started that website as well. And both of them have really kind of blossomed into these huge communities. I never wanted either one of those sites to be about me specifically. And that's the reason I didn't name them after me or my call sign or anything. I wanted them to be a community resource. And I'm really grateful that the community has grown up to be so massive around both of those websites.
Mm-hmm. And one can see, looking at both blogs, that there's a lot of community contributions and interaction with the community, and this is really a good sign of what you're doing is really interesting for everyone, and also motivates other people to join in and to share their experiences. Is there any? Can you remember, or can you think about any article or feature on the blogs which had the biggest impact on the readers?
So first of all, I'd have to apologize in advance. We have so many contributors. There's no way I'd be able to mention all the really cool things that come on the SWLing Post. But people really love a good bit of nostalgia. I think that shortwave radio listeners tend to be a nostalgic crowd in general, and we have lots of contributions. I think about also Bob Colgrove, who writes quite a bit. He has a regular contribution called Bob's Radio Corner, and he'll often talk about nostalgia. Lots of other contributors do as well. We have Dan Greenall, who submits lots of articles about how broadcasters sounded in the past and how they sound now on the air. He has old recordings that he's done, off-air recordings. People really love those. Don Moore has done huge series of articles of his travel logs throughout South and Central America and even Europe, and visiting small shortwave and AM broadcast stations, which is just absolutely fascinating. There have been so many contributions. People write in with homebrew antenna ideas, how they play radio in the field. Reviews, we get a lot of reviews, like from my friend Dan Robinson. He'll review, like, commercial grade, really expensive high-end receivers. And then we have, my friend Robert Gully and Jock Elliott, occasionally me, will review SDRs and portable radios, and lots of other people contribute. But I would say that in those, like, between nostalgia, recordings, and certain news items, of course, when we learn something big, kind of tectonic in the world of international broadcasting, people really like to catch up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems there's for all type of interests in this very broad hobby, and you mentioned so many of them, like from antennas to SDRs to nostalgia, and I fully agree to what you said. We all really do remember with great joy the good old times. Now, which brings me to my next question. You've started at a very early age. You said you were about 8. I think I was 13, but it's still a very long time ago. So how has shortwave radio changed since you started listening?
Well, it's kind of funny because I always see this, like, inverse relation between where technology is. Like, our technology was more basic and simple, a good technology for listening and DXing and that sort of thing back when I was, cutting my teeth in the early 80s. And now, where we have technology that's amazing and very inexpensive and ubiquitous, like, it's very accessible. You don't have to write off to some company to get a radio that you've never tried before. You can get a radio, try it, and send it back if you don't like it. Things have changed so much in terms of technology. In terms of broadcasting and what's on the spectrum, it's now not crowded full of big government broadcasters, the voice of this country and that country. And it's more, I find, a lot of private broadcasters. There still are government broadcasters, of course, but there's a lot more attention on really individual kind of artisan stations. Like we have some regular ones, like Imaginary Stations, and Bill Tilford, who I think I maybe even saw in some of the audience here, who has Uncle Bill's Melting Pot, and from the Isle of Music. We have Texas Shortwave. We have a bunch of other just interesting individuals who want to put their shingle out there on the shortwaves, and so they work with private broadcasters to put out their own music programming and some really interesting stuff. Of course, people are really interested in pirate radio as well, which is really thriving here in so many ways, and on the HF bands, and number stations and utility. I always attend the Shortwave Fest, the Winter SWL Festival, and it's usually in Pennsylvania. Sometime in the winter. It's now moved to like April or May. And I remember one one of the sessions I attended was a fellow who was DXing public service, small AM stations that are used by construction crews to notify you about construction and that sort of thing. And he was DXing them with a map, and he just found that so much fun. It was just something that was on the air and something interesting, and it was like a game to do it. So I think it's kind of open and very wide, very dynamic space now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned these you call them artisan, these small stations, and we also see them here in Europe, and we know that also in Australia there's some people operating such broadcasts, and I think that still makes the hobby so interesting, because it's not the big guns with the strong signals that you can catch, but it's something really you have to chase a little bit, and then programming is quite distinct and quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about technology. What do you think is most exciting technology right now?
Well, I would say besides software-defined radios in general, I think something that's really exciting are Web SDRs and access to Web SDRs. And the reason I say that, and there's some controversy, you'll have people who are really passionate one way or another about doing Web SDR listening, especially in terms of sending listener reports to stations and that sort of thing. And that's not really what I'm talking about. What I really love about them is if you're traveling, or let's say that you have you live in an environment where you really can't have a good antenna, or there's a lot of RFI, radio frequency interference where you live. A Web SDR allows you to control a remote receiver, and you're literally controlling that receiver through your web browser, and all it's doing is streaming the audio to you. So it's like it's transporting you to some other part of the world, no matter where you want to go. And there are Web SDRs everywhere. So it's like you're a local listener. And I really love that aspect of it. And I like listening to local stations by doing that. If I'm in Iceland or somewhere in Perth, Australia, or wherever, like you can just transport yourself there. And I think it's an especially good tool for, today, people move into condos and flats and apartments and things like that, where they really just don't have access to the airwaves easily and readily. And this allows them to escape that RFI environment and just use a web browser, and they can be on a train or wherever they want to be and do listening sessions, which I think is kind of fun. And you can record usually directly from those too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully share that. I mean, I remember that the shortwave listening was kind of traveling across the airwaves or using the airwaves, and now this Web SDR gives that again even more complete attribution now. And which brings me, and you mentioned the RFI, and I think most of us who are living in the cities, we all know how this has developed in the last 10 or 20 years. So is this one of the reasons why you decided to go outdoor and do portable?
It is. So I actually don't need to do that so much where I live. Well, I haven't had to in the past. We put solar panels on our house a couple of years ago, and that did change the RFI environment at our place. But we live in a remote sort of area here in the mountains of North Carolina, and we've never had RFI at the house. And in fact, if I just walk outside my home and I'm 20 meters away from my home, it's a very, very low RFI environment there. But I just like getting outdoors anyway. And it is the way that you can beat RFI, is to go to a park, a national park, a local park, a regional park, whatever. And the moment you're away from the power lines and the buildings and things like that, the RFI levels drop dramatically. And now it's so easy to take a portable radio or portable SDR or something to the field and have really meaningful sessions out there, working some serious DX, by being away. When you remove yourself from that noisy environment, your radio can actually perform. So some people think that, I've had so many people write to me over the years saying, like, I just bought this new radio and I can't hear a thing, it's deaf. And I'll finally find out, I'll say, hey, do me a favor, and before you return it, go to a park, turn it on, see what you hear. And they come back and they're like, okay, I was wrong about that. As I got closer, as I got away from my house, the noise went away, and it's amazing. So always keep that in mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being outdoor is definitely is fun on its own already. And if you like the nature, and there's beautiful parks in your country and also in other places in the globe. One question which just came into my mind, and that's my experience when I go outdoors, people usually stop and say, "Oh, what are you doing here? Are you chasing deer or what's going on?" Any experience on that?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So over on QRP, or I go out all the time and do ham radio in the field using Morse code. And if you want to attract people, you just have Morse code out there, because people don't hear that except maybe in movies or something. And I'm so often asked if I'm a spy. And I always tell them, if I'm a spy, I'm a horrible spy because I'm incredibly conspicuous, right? And so I get asked that a lot. I get asked if I'm trying to contact aliens, all kinds of things. So sometimes when I don't want those interruptions, I'll try to be really low profile and stealthy. Otherwise, I don't really mind. I think it's fun. It's an easy way to engage people and tell them what I'm up to, and have them listen to what I'm doing.
Okay, which is making best publicity of a fascinating hobby. I've seen on the QRP blog, and everyone can see you're taking your logbook is sometimes it's just paper and pencil, like in the good old days, and that's fine. Do you have any other tips for people here, like special type of do-it-yourself antennas, or what's the most important thing if you go outdoors? I remember I always run low on batteries. That's my usual problem.
Yeah. So with, I would say on the ham radio side, which by the way, you can combine, I often combine my listening sessions with my sessions on the air when I'm an amateur radio operator, because most of my radios that I take to the field are general coverage. So I can turn over to the amateur radio, or the broadcast bands from the amateur radio bands, turn on AM mode, or just even in single sideband and listen around for a while. I would say that one thing I see people do sometimes, they would take the same antenna system that they would use in their noisy environment at home, like a wideband amplified loop antenna, and they try to take that to the field. You don't really need to do that when you go to the field. You can get away with simple wires, with really simple antennas. I would just take a long wire if you've got a robust enough radio. If it's a small portable, you don't want the wire to be much longer than maybe, I don't know, like 30 feet or something. You don't want it to be terribly long, because you don't want any static discharge to hurt your radio. But if you've got a larger radio that's made for an external antenna, maybe even get like a ZM2 balance line antenna tuner, a BLT, I think they call it. And those have two pots that you can change, and it helps you just match the impedance of the antenna to your radio, and really helps out with the reception. And it doesn't require any batteries or anything. So that's a really easy way to, and those are like, I think $70 or $80, depending on if you want to build it as a kit or not. And that and a wire with your radio, you'll be set in the field.
Okay. And what about, what kind of SDR software or SDR setup are you using, and what would you recommend, which is reliable for outdoor?
So for outdoors, I haven't used my SDRs a whole lot outdoors, because I've got an SDR transceiver that I use a lot, the ICOM IC705, which is an amazing receiver in its own right for broadcasts or for whatever you want to listen to. It's a great amateur radio receiver. It's not cheap, but it's great, and it has built-in recording and playback of audio, which is really nice in the field. So I tend to use that one as opposed to taking like my laptop and everything. But when I do take my laptop, or actually it's a little Surface Go tablet, and I want to record Spectrum or something like that when I'm at the field, I'll usually take an SDR Play SDR, or an AirSpy, the Discovery HF, or usually the RSP Duo is one of the ones, or the RSP DX. I take any of those to the field, and I find that they're just minimum requirements for power and that sort of thing, and they work really well.
And you're running them off a local off a local battery, so you're not using anything from a vehicle, from a car.
Exactly, and usually I have a nice big battery bank that I'm using for my tablet. My tablet will run that for a surprisingly long time. So yeah, I don't have to do that. But I have to say that I do have, because I'm an amateur radio operator and I take stuff to the field, I do have larger lithium iron phosphate batteries and things with power distribution and everything like that I even have solar panels if I really want to do a super long session.
Okay, which may create some RFI, but you're out in the field and they might be the only source then.
Well, the charge controllers that I use do not create RFI because they're very simple charge controllers,
okay.
so they don't do that. But
okay,
but yeah,
that's great news. That's great news. Okay, let's look forward. What's your next? What's next in your projects or for you up in the shortwave hobby? What are your plans?
Well, I would say that for the website, for the SWLing Post, I continue to make it even more and more community contribution thing. I'm only one guy, so I can't do all the contributions myself, and I haven't been for the past few years. We've had a very active family life with lots going on, and so the community has really been the driving force. I'm more like the curator of the website, if anything, and I see that getting even more robust as we move forward, more people participating, because I want the websites to live beyond me, right? If I get hit by a beer truck, that's what I always say. I want it. Other people have keys to the website. Other people have keys to the websites to keep them going. And that's actually another thing I invest a lot of time in is my Shortwave Radio Audio Archive, which is at shortwavearchive.com. And that is actually in partnership with the Library of Congress's Radio Preservation Task Force. And it's a huge, huge, huge archive of off-air recordings made by enthusiasts like us who back in the day and even today make recordings and save them and want to share them. And so we archive them properly online and share them through a podcast format. So when you subscribe to the podcast of the Shortwave Radio Audio Archive, there's no talking, there's no me talking in there. It is just a recording straight off the air with notes of what it was. And it's kind of fun because you can drive down the road and play the podcast, and you just don't know what could come next, what year it's from, what decade it's from. It'll be some interesting recording. Maybe it's short and it's an interval signal, or maybe it's a full broadcast. And so that's a real joy. And lots of people use that beyond enthusiasts. We get all the time, I get questions if they can use these clips for movies, for music. Musicians want to do it, TV producers, series producers, they want to use audio clips for atmospheric reasons, and the context of what they're doing. Also, lots of researchers and historians and students and professors, and it's just wonderful that so many people get to use that resource and it's readily accessible.
This sounds really great. Very, very, very important initiative because we all know that these shortwave signals, they are somewhere out in space, the ones which could skip the ionosphere. But on this planet, this archive is one way, and perhaps the best way, and perhaps even the only way that how we can preserve these memories for future use. One last question: if you meet a young person and he says, "Okay, sounds interesting. What should I start? Should I enter into DXing? What would you suggest?"
I would say to start modestly. You can buy a very inexpensive portable radio, and that's probably even a better way to start, unless someone really wants to go into the world of SDRs from the beginning, because that stuff interests them and that's the pull that brings them into the hobby. Otherwise, I'd say get just a small portable. Like some of our smallest, most affordable portables actually perform very well these days. And go to the field, get away from your home, wherever you are, go out to the field and spend time listening. Put on a pair of earphones or headphones, plug it into the radio, and spend time listening, because listening is a skill. And I have known DXers that I've sat beside of, during small D expeditions and things like that, where they're just doing long listening sessions, and they can hear IDs and they can hear things that I couldn't hear when I was newer in the hobby. And it's because they've developed those skills of listening. And that's just something that takes time, and just immerse yourself in it and enjoy it and explore it. And check out all these online resources, and especially like the WRTH, to find out what you're listening to, right? Like that, it's important to know what you're listening to, because you're not always there at the top of the hour or during some kind of identification. So that's a really great way to do that, and to open the world of radio.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas, for this statement. Wonderful. Back to Sakshi and for questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you, Gunter. This has been such an interesting discussion. Let me have a look at the Q&A section we have. We did have one comment from Richard. Audio is great, but video is jumpy for me. Could be due to limited bandwidth. I know Thomas has from his home. We were talking about this before the session, Thomas and I, that this is one of the trade-offs of him living in the mountains and me living near the beach. We struggle with the bandwidth, but we're okay with it.
Yes,
we,
that's
we do have
I'm actually at a friend's house right now because the bandwidth's so much better here for doing this than it would be at my house.
We do have a couple of questions we received through our email newsletter. So I'll go through them. Meanwhile, if the audience has any questions, you all can share it through the chat box you see on your screen. So one question that I have is, what's the most common mistake you see new listeners or DXers make, and how can they avoid it?
Okay, I would say that probably the most common that I see, and this kind of goes back to the whole issue of just the reality of modern HF listening, is people will choose the wrong antenna for their environment. I mean, like I said, I get lots and lots and lots of questions from readers, and most of the time they'll come to me and they've put together a setup, and sometimes people invest a whole lot of money into a radio and then very little money into the antenna that they're using. And you really kind of want to do the opposite of that. Usually you want to really think through the antenna. So if you're in an urban environment and you've got a lot of noise, then you want something like an amplified wideband mag loop antenna, because that'll make a massive difference in what you can do. And if you like to be in the medium waves and listen down that low, then you may want like you may want to have it on a rotor or something that you can control, because it'll be directional then. And it can make a huge difference. If you have a long wire hanging out of your window and you're surrounded by other properties that are spewing RFI, you're just going to hear that noise really well and not hear other things. So that's probably one of the very biggest, that's probably the biggest kind of mistake that people make up front when they're not thinking through their antenna setup.
I think that's very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing. I have another question. What trends or technologies are you most excited about right now?
Oh, there are so many. One of them is, to me, I have always been a fan since since the infancy of this, of spectrum recordings. And what I would like to see, SDRs are becoming more portable. They're becoming very affordable. They're now in like small boxes that you can take to the field that have speakers on them and color screens and all of that. There are a lot of variations out there on the market that you can get pretty affordably now. I would really like one that could do native spectrum recording, so that you could go to the field. So like if you live in an early urban environment, one of my buddies who goes by London Shortwave, for well over a decade now, he makes his own systems where he lives in London, and so he goes to parks and he sets up his station for an hour or two and makes a spectrum recording, and then he takes it back to his apartment and he's able to listen to it then. But it's a lot of like little small individual components, hard drives, SDR, powers, all these different things. It'd be great if someone would integrate it. And I see people doing this, where you can integrate that into one unit that has enough storage that you could make spectrum recordings and so easily play them back on the same unit if you wanted to. So that's where I'd like to see technology go. But I think that the technology itself, the receiver technology, is there's no better time to be a radio listener than now. Because of the accessibility of amazing technology for listening.
Yeah. Absolutely love that perspective, because we often hear this discussion that the radio industry is dying, but like you said, it's such an incredible time for people to explore this now more than ever. Thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. And unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but this has been such an insightful discussion. Thank you, Thomas, for sharing your experiences, and thank you, Gunter, for leading today's conversation. Before we close, a quick reminder for everyone that the pre-orders for WRTH 2026 80th edition are now live. This is our milestone collector's edition with over 800 pages, expanded features, and exclusive anniversary content. It's the only way to get the printed version will be pre-order, and there will be no reprints. So please make sure you pre-order your 2026 web app, ebook, printed book, or the limited edition book through our website, wrth.info. After this session, we will upload it on all our channels, and we will also send a newsletter with the link. So thank you so much for being here. And if you'd like to replay, you'll have it shortly in your inbox. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Gunter. And thank you, everybody, to all those who joined in.
Thank you, Thomas, for sharing your insights and your experience with us. It has been a pleasure. Happy listening and enjoy the time outdoor, and watch out for bears.
Yeah, I actually have to watch out for them. Hey, thank you so much. It was a pleasure and an honor.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who was listening this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye, and see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.